In this video, I will try to discuss Vladimir Putin's ideology and its implications for the global south, the developing countries that are mostly but not exclusively in the southern hemisphere. The best and clearest and most up-to-date presentation of Vladimir Putin's ideology actually was done by himself recently in October 26 in Moscow at the Valdai discussion club, where he talked for 3 hours and 40 minutes about his understanding of the existing international system and his vision for a future global order. Basically, he focuses in a power politics mentality to the distribution of power in the international system, and claims that we have shifted from unipolarity to multipolarity. This, of course, here unipolarity referring to the United States' preeminent position at the end of Cold War when the bipolar system collapsed, which, by the way, for Vladimir Putin is the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. And his actually whole foreign policy vision is to restore this situation. And right here, actually, this Valdai speech was mostly given to international guests for developing countries and was almost like a pitch of Vladimir Putin to the developing countries to join his cause and support his war in Ukraine from these developing countries. But there was actually something that is in social sciences called the ecological fallacy or aggregation fallacy. In that, Vladimir Putin is in his speech calling for international democracy, meaning the different countries in the world, coming from different civilizations and having different political systems, should be free to exist and flourish as they wish, and the West should not intervene to them. Okay, he wants an end to Western hegemony in international affairs, but then he interestingly turns around and claims that the Russian Federation doesn't want to be a new hegemon or a pole, and in fact, neither from the south or east or west, there should be no hegemon in the system at all. So this is, if you noticed, in contradiction with his desire to restore to Russian Federation the former superpower status of the Soviet Union. That is also him talking about it quite a bit in his public speeches. And the other interesting thing was the internationalization of democracy, where democracy is understood not government by the people as individual human beings, but international democracy where different states are the important actors and they should be free to do what they want. For instance, according to that logic, a citizen of North Korea, uh, how is that citizen supposed to benefit from the fruits of democratization and democracy if, let's say, the North Korean dictatorship has more free room for maneuver at the international arena? Democracy for the North Korean dictatorship doesn't mean democracy for the North Korean people. In fact, one of the most dramatic situations now exist for the Russian people themselves, who have actually been indoctrinated and engulfed within a reality bubble created by the imperial nostalgia of Vladimir Putin for the last 20 years, preparing the Russian people for these days. But apparently, he wanted to launch this war not only for territorial gains and not only for capturing control of Ukraine, but impacting the international system in a violent manner with radical revisionism and leading potentially to a collapse of the Western hegemony in the world and the emergence of an anti-Western, anti-hegemonial coalition together with Russia, India, Brazil, perhaps other larger developing countries joining in his original imagination, it seems. And this way, rather than being marginalized, the Russia and a revived Russian Empire of sorts, with potential future intentions on the Baltics and Poland and Hungary as well. And this, this would again put Vladimir Putin in a very distinguished position in Russian history, together with the czars and Stalins of the past. Uh, One of the great men of the history he wanted to be, but his I mean, also his adventure shows the inefficiency of non-democratic regimes. I mean, how much how clueless he was from international and domestic reality and about the real capabilities of his armed forces, even let alone the capabilities of the Ukrainians and even perhaps the NATO capabilities. It seems that he embarked on a major miscalculation and entered this terrible adventure that will actually mean decrease the quality of life for the Russians for decades to come, and but perhaps a more democratic Russian state, one or more, may emerge out of the Russian Federation, because as now by now is quite clear, Putin's armies are performing very poorly, and not only the military dimension, but the intelligence and propaganda dimension, and the debates within Russia show the world how actually inefficient autocracies are, and how democracy actually is not only a Western propaganda, but has real substance to it, in the sense that democratic Russia would never make the mistakes that Putin did make, because in democracies, one thing that democracy brings is transparency, and together with it, accountability. And Russian people are educated people and reasonable people. They would have never allowed this misadventure to proceed like that had they had had more information and influence on the conduct of Russian domestic and foreign policies. So, in a way, this case shows also the failure of non-democratic regimes, especially when they conflict with democratic regimes, how poorly they perform is quite dramatic. On the other hand, I would also like to, as someone from the South myself, I see that despite this terrible war and terrible historical mistakes, Putin's actions and this starting this war and shaking this Western hegemony has actually opened a window of opportunities for the global South, but not necessarily opportunities that Putin has envisaged or is talking about, such as joining an anti-hegemonial coalition and entering conflict with the West. Putin's methods of revisionism were radical and violent. However, so far, developing countries have inclined towards non-radical and peaceful uh, transformation of the global international institutions, not through violence, but through cooperation, through international negotiations and the like. For instance, uh, on the 15th and 16th of November, there will be a meeting of the leaders and representatives of the 20 largest economies in the world in Bali, Indonesia, and these are this is, for instance, a platform that becomes brings together the Western countries together with the larger developing countries, and the Indonesians have prepared a rather interesting program focusing on real quality of life issues, real issues that actually impact the lives of the peoples. For instance, Their motto is recover together, recover stronger, and three pillars of their program is global health architecture, one, two, sustainable energy transition, and three, digital transformation. So, indeed, our planet is facing major problems at the global level, especially climate change and global warming, and other demographic trends and health related issues. The world has real problems, and Vladimir Putin's attempt to capture Ukraine and thus to kind of lead to a collapse of the Western hegemony or Western bloc. Actually, history already has shown us that it backfired big time, where the West unexpectedly revived, and because they were scared and threatened, they came very strongly together. United States, Canada, Western European countries, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand. There is already a very strong Western coalition that corresponds to, let's say, about 60% of the $100 trillion world economy, whereas the Soviet Union is less than 2% of this world economy, and China is close to 20%. But even Russia and China together are significantly marginal, relatively speaking, vis-a-vis the dominance of the Western bloc countries and their allies. So, in that sense, what happens is not the emergence of more multipolarity. In fact, before Putin started the war, the world system was indeed moving from unipolar collective hegemony by the West towards a more inclusive system, towards more multipolarity. But Putin's invasion has changed that. Now, all of a sudden, the West came strongly around U.S. leadership, and so we have a revival of unipolarity in Putin's terminology. But what is the opportunity for the developing countries here? I think the opportunity for the developing countries is indeed the system has been shaken. There was a shock. The West was shaken. Now the developing countries should come up with positive agendas and engage the West in constructive cooperation and demanding non-violently more participation in the planetary management of our planet's global affairs, and but not only do this in terms of just rhetorically criticizing a Western hegemony and Western imperialism and complaining about it all the time, although that's well taken and that may be a starting point. But now what is needed is more creative new projects, and not necessarily leaving the initiative to the West or East, but we, the people of the developing countries, the global South, we should take the initiative into our own hands by first democratizing our own countries, fighting for democracies within our countries, and then creating a genuine coalition of democratic countries, not necessarily as a Western propaganda or anything like that, but just for ourselves and for our children and for future generations, in order to maintain peace and cope with the enormous ecological challenges we are facing on our planet here. We should, as developing countries, now take this opportunity of instability and put our weight on the decision making tables with constructive and well grounded arguments and agendas, and taking really the initiative into our own hands. These are my ideas for today. I wish peace and prosperity for future generations.